Thank you all for tuning in. The following is a presentation of Bald Spots Productions. Be sure to like, comment, and share. Subscribe, follow, whatever it is you've got to do to kick that algorithm into gear and help us reach more people. It is I, your humble host, Bill Hatch the Third, coming to you live from the Place Home Studios of Bald Spots Productions here in the beautiful city of Malden, Missouri. Joining me today from more than acceptable safe social distances are my guests for today, Mark David Gerson and Jeff Rasley. How are you gentlemen doing?
Doing great, thank you.
Very good. Good to be with you again, Bill.
Yes, good to have you back. And hopefully this will be a different experience for you, because we have a different person here with us. But having issues communicating with them and trying to reconnect. Great. Okay. Well, we'll continue as issues are abounding. My first question that I always ask everybody is, what are you reading? So, Mark David, we'll start with you. What are you reading right now?
Well, can I answer by what I'm listening to? Because ever since I recorded my first audiobook over the summer, I've been hooked on audiobooks.
Okay, sure. We'll count it.
Okay. So I'm reading something that's not new. It's a book written by the American author Richard Russo, and it's called Empire Falls.
Okay. What are some key takeaways you're getting from it this time?
He paints small town America. This book is set in Maine. The other books I've actually read, as opposed to listened to of his, have all been set in the Northeast. And it's usually very character driven, and that's what I like. I like to read interesting people, just as I like to write interesting people.
Yeah. So I'm going to cheat a little bit because last night I had to reread part of my own last book because I submitted an excerpt to a publication called Synchronized Chaos that I've published through a number of times. So I had to reread that book to decide what excerpt I wanted to send them. And that book is called A Hitchhiker's Big Adventure on the Road from Indiana to Key West and New Orleans for Mardi Gras 1972. But I am, like Mark, listening to another book, which I'm not actually enjoying, which I'm surprised because it's by Bernard Cornwell. And I can't even remember the title of it because when you do an audiobook, you don't see the front page to see the title of the book you're listening to. And it's disappointing and kind of horrible because Cornwell is a wonderful writer. He's written a bunch of series that I've really enjoyed. But this book has, as the main character, a young woman who starts out as this vibrant, sort of rebellious, spirited young woman, and she has descended into becoming a whiny, incompetent domestic. And so that's really disappointing. Plus, there's a lot of sort of sadistic torture scenes in it. So I'm almost on the verge of dropping it. But because I like Cornwell so much, I'm going to stick with it and hope it gets better.
Well, hopefully there's an explanation at some point as to why somebody would change characters so drastically.
Yeah, and not in an enjoyable way. I mean, her arc, you think of an arc, the character is sort of going up. This one is going down.
Yikes. Oh, goodness. Well, I do apologize for cutting out there. So everybody knows my internet has been acting up. I'm going to have to make a call and after this is done and find out what's going on there. But no, that is awesome though. It's great to be doing some reading. I'm reading in preparation for going back to school, so nothing I'm reading is that interesting. although I did just read, what's it called? Autopsy of a Deceased Church, and because I'm going to school for a Master of Divinity in a thing called Marketplace Ministry, and so there's a lot of leadership and things like that, social media and technology. Oh,
Well, that sounds actually interesting, at least to me, because I have the MDiv degree.
Oh,
What, and I was in seminary back in the mid to late 80s, and dying churches were definitely a big issue back then, and that continues to
it
be one.
does.
That was my cat's tail just whipped in front of the screen. Sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering what that. I think I saw the cat in the background a moment ago. So, of course, they always have
Yeah,
to get into it. But
yeah,
but
she's a
yeah,
camera hog.
yeah, they usually are. My cat ran away when we got here to Missouri, so she decided there were greener pastures. But
no. Well,
but
I have a dog, and he's over there chewing on something right now to keep him out of mischief. But you never know.
that's true. You do never know. Yeah, our dogs. I live with my cousin, and he's got the dogs with him right now, and they tend to be very lazy. So I don't generally worry about them too much. But yeah. So Jeff, you're familiar with the problem that churches are having of dying?
Oh yeah. Um, I did at least to me, was a very interesting study. At the conclusion of my seminary experience, um, a a local church, which was close to dying, asked me to serve as a consultant,
Wow.
do a very thorough examination of the church, its practices, history, location, etc., and try to come up with a plan to turn it around. And what was really interesting, and I think this is true of many churches, was the my conclusion was the only way you're going to increase your numbers in the way that you would like to is for you to make some dramatic changes. And the problem is the people that were there really liked the way it was, and they
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to change. They wanted to just kind of, nibble around the edges. Oh, do some more marketing.
Yeah.
Try to do some outreach in the neighborhood. I said, well, you've been in this neighborhood for 70 years, so I think the neighbors pretty well know you're here. So I don't see that as effective. Sure, you can come up with some new sort of uh, hipper marketing, promo, branding efforts, but that's the problem is people are going to come and they're going to see the way you do your services is very traditional.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to reach young people, um, this isn't going to be what appeals to them. And so, the end of my consultancy for that church was just, sorry, you're on a slow spiral downward, and you're going to continue on that spiral downward unless you're willing to make really significant changes, which you're not.
Right. Right. That's kind of how the book goes. I've actually survived the deaths of two churches. One when I was still in high school, and it was a church my father preached at. He got assigned there because the church was dying, and he'd brought back a church before, but this one was too far gone. It was just terrible. And the last one was again the family church. This was the church that my family members had gone to since 1949, and great grandparents, grandparents, and both parents, and then myself, and both grandparents, both sets of grandparents, that is, and Yeah, the funny thing is this book almost reads like the biography of that church. Everything that happened that was good was in the past. Everything, the preachers that were great were in the past. Everybody was weird and different now, and they didn't want to change the service. They tried merging with a younger church, but they really didn't want to do that. They brought the new church in. They bought the facility, and so saving the building, and then the people from the old church basically held church in one of the smaller rooms. They wouldn't go to the new church's services, and and it was like, and so they ended up leaving taking their toys and going, and about 6 months later, they decided to close the doors. And the new church, as far as I know, is still plugging away at the old building, but they're not. They're definitely not the old church. And yeah, it was crazy. I'm reading this book and I'm going, and it's like, okay, that happened, that happened. And yeah,
Mhm.
you're right. I mean, that's basically the thing of it. If you're not willing to make drastic changes, I mean, you got to kind of think of yourself like a business. You're trying to sell yourself to and the message to the community. And if you're trying to sell it to a different community, then they're not going to receive it. They're not gonna buy in. And so the community had become like 70-80% Hispanic, and they definitely were not in the church. And I think the new church is going to have a similar issue, because they were used to reaching Asian audiences. So so it's gonna be interesting to see if they survive much longer. So.
He worked with another church which was very similar to the first one.
Mm-hmm.
These were both Presbyterian churches, very traditional in many
Yeah.
ways, but the second one was willing to make changes. And so what they did, which is there's some parallel with what you just described, they created a second service that was designed for younger people. They had a rock band, which is very good. I mean, really, really great musicians,
Mm-hmm.
and designed the service to include kids in more ways than just, okay, now we're going to have a cute little children's sermon and then get out of here. So the families could stay together during the service and feel comfortable with that. And what they did with the older people is they had the early service. So they had two service. Early service was for the older people. It was very traditional, choir, organ, that whole bit. And just over time, over a period of probably 8 years, the older people basically died off, um, hopefully left money to the church, which I know several of them did, and which was why we wanted to keep them happy and
Right.
felt like they were still important to the church. And that first service just ended. And it was it was a real success story in that. And this was, oh gosh, the change was probably 20, yeah, 15, 20 years ago, and that church is still going strong, and it's centered on families, particularly families with kids. So it can be done,
Yeah.
but it's hard when, I mean, this isn't just for churches. I mean, any organization that's been successful and that has a cadre of involved people, and this is how it's always been done, and it's worked, and okay, now it's not working anymore.
Right.
What are you
But
going
we
to
don't
do?
want to change. It's not working anymore, but we don't want to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another, I mean, this is kind of a coincidental that this discussion has gone this way because sorry to be trying to self-promote my latest book, but I
That's
actually have
okay.
a chapter in this book where the protagonist is hitchhiking around the country and he spends a night at a church. And it turns out this is a church that's dying. It was a Episcopalian church and a
Mm.
very traditional service and so forth. But the neighborhood has changed, and the neighborhood is primarily black now, African
Mm.
American. And so the priest, takes the young man in, and they become, close, have interesting theological discussions. And he wants the young man to stay on and help him revitalize the church. And so
Hmm.
that's a chapter in the hitchhiking adventure of the protagonist, which,
Interesting.
you know,
And what was the
sorry
name of
for the
that book
plug
again?
there, but it just
That's
fit
okay.
perfectly into our discussion.
Yeah, yeah. No, we'll go all out with the plug. What's the name of the book?
The title is very long, A Hitchhiker's Big Adventure, then subtitle, On the Road from Indiana to Key West and New Orleans for Mardi Gras 1972. So it's based on an actual experience I had, but
Okay.
it's what we call autofiction. So it's
Right.
a fictionalized memoir, because since it happened 50 years ago, I couldn't remember enough. Didn't keep a journal, didn't take photographs. 18-year-old, just out to have an adventure. So I had to base much of the story on my recollection of things that happened, but fictionalize it and make it probably a little more exciting and dramatic
Hmm.
than the actual experience was.
I can, yeah, I can understand that. I've thought about, it's like people talk about memoirs and autobiographies and the like, and I'm thinking like, yeah, I could never write one of those. I don't remember half the stuff that happened, and the stuff that I do remember,
You'd be,
I can't keep it in the right order.
I teach memoir writing, among other things, and you'd be surprised at how much you actually do remember when you start writing it.
Okay.
That's true. And Mark, I actually have taught memoir writing as well for an organization called Indiana Writers Center here in Indianapolis. Um, And when I started writing this book, which I intended it from the beginning to be fiction, but based fairly closely on my actual experience, it was amazing how just this well of memories of 50 years ago came back to me with, really extraordinarily close details.
Hmm.
Um, but I've written a few memoirs, and the freedom of getting to make stuff up
Oh, for sure.
while basing it on or being inspired by actual experiences. It's I don't know, it's more fun and liberating.
I've done that too. I have several memoirs. Whoops, and I also have a fiction series that's loosely based on well, my growing up, I guess, my teens and early 20s. So yes, it was kind of fun to with a memoir to remember
Or
things
to
I thought I'd
realize,
forgotten,
remember,
and with the fiction to be able to kind of turn that into what I wanted it to be as opposed to what it actually was.
yeah,
Wow.
I actually, the very first book I wrote, although it was the second one to get published because it sat on the shelf for a while, but was I practiced law for 30 years, and I had this case that was just it was really heartrending. I was actually representing building this huge tabernacle and youth center, and it was a beautiful image to help inner city Indianapolis. Yeah. And it was essentially stolen from him by real estate developers in collusion with local government, and So we appealed his case up through the Indiana Supreme Court, lost based on that case, only we win.
Huh.
Yeah, well, sure.
So, that's as you were saying, you can, if it's fiction, you can make it turn out the way you want it to, even if in real life it didn't. So that I got my revenge.
Oh, so Mark David, what's some of the stuff? Because I know you coach writers. What are some of the
Hmm.
interesting things that you've come across?
In terms of my coaching, well, the writers I tend to work with are ones that have, like I was many years ago, really creatively blocked, um,
Okay.
or are ones who um, really feel like they have a book in them, but they're not quite sure what it is. In fact, I have a book that's called "Birthing Your Book," even if you don't know what it's about, which addresses that particular issue. So it's really working with both new and established writers um, to help them get whatever stories they've got inside them out.
Okay. I can imagine that can be difficult at times.
Well, I've grown increasingly fussy over the years as to who I'll work with, simply because at the beginning, it's like whoever I'll work with anybody, right? Because you want to build a practice and
Right.
you want to make some money. But I discovered that the people who say they're committed but aren't or don't want to be are just not worth the aggravation, really. So,
Right.
you know, I pick and choose who I want to work with because I want it to be pleasurable for me as well as productive for them.
Okay. Sure. What are some common pitfalls people fall into as they're writing?
Well, one of them, of course, is I have this great idea for a book, but I don't know how to start, or I have all these great ideas, I don't know which one to choose, or I've written half the book and now I'm stuck.
Mm.
Or one of my favorites is I want to write, but I have no time. And of course,
Yeah. If you don't have
everyone
time to
has
write the
time.
book, if you don't
Everyone
have
has
time to write
time.
the
It's a question of choices
prioritizing.
and priorities, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
Um, I had an experience. Gosh, this is 2008, so however many years ago that was, when the world's finances collapsed and mine collapsed along with it, and I ended up getting probably one of the worst jobs of my life. I was actually a 50-something-year-old stock boy at Hobby Lobby, the craft chain,
I know it.
and it was horrible. It was it was actually it was physically demanding. It was just an awful experience.
Mm.
And I decided that a book I had started, well, I decided the only way I was going to stay sane and maybe alive was to go back to a book that I had started and had let go. And I said, well, I'm so exhausted. I have no time. I said, what my clients would say to me. And I said, well, no, that's not true. So what, if I were my client, what would I tell me? And I said, well, what about, lots of writers get up, before dawn and write, 4 or 5 in the
Mm.
morning before they go to work. And I thought, well, that'll work for me once, maybe twice, or stay up really late. But this job is physically demanding. And I thought when I got home, I basically ate dinner and crashed. That wasn't going to work. So what could I do? And what I realized was I needed to set a goal that was manageable, that was achievable. When people teach goal setting, they often say, well, set really great goals. And I say, no, set really tiny goals because then you can meet them and then increase them as
Right.
opposed to setting this huge goal, not meeting it and feeling crappy. So I said, so what's what can I actually do? What can I actually do and keep doing? I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to set my alarm for 15 minutes before I actually have to get up. And I'm going to stay in bed and I'm going to write. And so
Okay.
those 15 minutes don't seem like a lot, but chunks of 15 minutes do add up. And as I did this, I would take the manuscript to work with me and sit in the lunchroom and work on it. And I'd work on it on the weekends. And suddenly, the more I did, the more I wanted to do. And I found the time. I made the time, even that small amount to start with. And I finished the draft, that year, to my
Wow.
amazement.
Yeah, it's amazing how working just a little bit at a time, those little chunks add up. It's the old how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Well, one of my favorite stories is about Connie Willis, who's an award-winning science fiction author. And I saw her interviewed many, many years ago. And she said, she was a teacher, and when her first child was born, she said, "Oh, I'm going to stay home and write because I can do that at home." And she discovered, she says, over the next 18 years, that she never had more than 15 minutes at a time because of all the demands of the family and child raising and all of that. And she learned to write in these small chunks of time, sitting in the car waiting for her kid to come out of school, or waiting for her husband to come out of the gymnastics class, or sitting in the doctor's office. And so that was really inspiring to me, because I realized you don't need days and days and days, and you don't need full days. All you need is a little bit of time and a commitment.
Yeah. Yeah, that commitment is the important part, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when people can't commit, I will sometimes ask them, well, are you writing what you are passionate about? Because you're not writing what you're passionate about. A, why are you doing it? And B, it's much harder to stay committed to something that you don't really care about or feel an obligation to.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Let's see. So, what's the most recent book you've written?
Written or released? Because it's not the same thing.
Okay, let's go with release, since that's what people can find.
Okay. Right. So I have among the books I've written, I have a fantasy series. And I'm actually wearing a T-shirt for the book. There you go, The Moon Quest.
Okay, the Moon Quest.
And it's actually a re-release. I'm re-releasing the books in the series, and I'm actually working on the fifth, but this is the first in the series. And re-releasing it because it covers, not intentionally, but issues of censorship and kind of, in a sense, book banning, and kind of a lot of the issues that we're dealing with today, that felt like a really good time to put this back out into the world.
Wow. What? Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about that, about censorship and and book banning and whatnot. Because that's an interesting topic. I myself don't believe in unnecessary censorship. Basically, I only censor for violent topics and or rather the inspiration for violent topics. I don't want I don't want people to watch the show and then suddenly think they need to go out and become violent. But otherwise, and I've never come across an instance where I've had to edit out for that. Thank goodness. But yeah, I've never censored the show for anything. Part of it, I guess, is because I'm too lazy to spend the time to edit out the specific parts. But
You're also probably
but,
careful about the guests you choose, so that probably helps too.
Oh, well, remember, I don't choose my guests. The guests choose me.
Well, you don't.
So
I've had an interesting experience with book banning. I've been involved with an organization here in Indy, which is the Kurt Vonnegut Memorial Library. And of course, Vonnegut wrote books which have been on the banned list off and on whenever sort of this some local group decides that there are books that need to be banned from schools or libraries, and so Vonnegut is always one of those that gets banned. And so the organization has a banned books week every year. And what they do during that week is they send out free copies of books that have been banned to individuals who had been patrons of libraries or students at schools and have had books banned either at their library or at their school. And so then our Vonnegut Memorial Library will send anybody that contacts the organization that banned book
That's
or
cool.
books, multiples. And so and there are a bunch of events that are coordinated with that. And so it's been this sort of anti-book banning week every year for probably 15 years now. So, long before this latest round of the Moms for Liberty effort to ban books started.
Well, in the premise of the Moon Quest, it, sorry, there's an echo. The premise of the Moon Quest is it takes place in a land where stories have been banned and storytellers have been exiled or more likely put to death. So the imagination is gone, storytelling is gone, and kind of the consequences of that.
Right, that sounds really
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. Because we definitely.
Is it on audio?
Yes, that's so. I mentioned at the beginning that I had recorded my first audiobook this summer. That is the audiobook I recorded, and I'm the narrator. So yeah, it's on Audible and then on Apple Books right now.
Great, and you were the narrator.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was an interesting experience.
I'll bet. I've had a bunch of my books turned into audiobooks, but I have not had the guts or the commitment or will to do the narration myself. Thank you.
It was hard work. It was very hard work. It was hard work. It was hard work emotionally, but it was hard work physically. I really had to train. I tend to talk too quickly, so I really had to train myself to slow down, to a pace that people could actually listen to, and not having me racing through the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was. I would do it again. I would definitely do it again.
Did you have much dialogue and have to do, multiple different voices in the narration?
It's funny you should ask that, because that was one of my biggest insecurities, was how I would handle the characters. And I did some research, the voiceover artists who do voices, and then I read, or I've been watching videos, people saying, if you can't do the voices, don't try. I thought that's more me, because not only do you have to do the voices, you have to remember which voice is which as you go through the story. So I just narrated it more or less straight, but I actually have had some feedback saying, wow, you did those characters really well. So I don't know what I did. But I guess I did it. I mean, I didn't really, I may have altered the timbre of my voice a little bit, but I think it's more in the expression than it needs necessarily to be in the actual change of voice for the characters.
You have the advantage of really, really knowing the book, knowing the characters. Like my last book has a lot of dialogue and people from different regions in the country, from New Orleans to Deep South to the hills of Eastern Kentucky. So there's a lot of dialect, and my narrator is a voice actor. He's an actor in the Seattle area, and I've worked with him before, so I'm pretty confident he can do it. But it's that's a talent that goes well beyond just writing. And really props to you that you could do it. I'd be interested to listen to it.
Great. Well, that's the advantage of fantasy, because there are no regional accents to deal with. There may be some weird sounding names, and weird sounding place names and things like that. But in terms of uh, accents and things, that's something I wouldn't have to deal with. The novel I mentioned earlier, the one that was kind of semi-autobiographical, is set in my hometown, which is Montreal, and it involves my background is Jewish, and that's in the story, and there's some Yiddish in the story. I'm not sure how well I would do that if I were to narrate that, but I'd probably be open to giving it a try.
Yeah, way back when I thought I was going to be an actor, I took on a role that had to have two different accents in it because there was a play within the play, and so they were two different British accents, and I studied accents for months trying to get it right, because I mean, who hasn't seen a movie where somebody's had a Dick Van Dyke accent?
That's the example I was going to use.
But yeah, because that was just terrible. A bad accent. Well, I mean, in a movie like Mary Poppins, I guess it's not the worst thing that could happen, but yeah, in a movie that's serious and or in a
more
book
realistic,
that's serious, more realistic, it could take you right out of the story.
For sure. Well, one of my friends said to me, "Well, why don't you start doing this professionally?" I said, "It's much too hard to do it for other people. It was hard enough to do it for myself. I don't think I'd want to do it for anybody else." And as you said before, Jeff, it really helps when you know the book intimately. And I think, when we're talking about doing the characters, the fact that I know this book so intimately and I know these characters so intimately and I've lived with the story for such a long time, I guess maybe it just came naturally. I didn't really have to work at it.
Yeah, I can see that. And I haven't been seriously tempted to try it myself. But it's the sort of thing where if I felt committed to it, I would like to try it. But on the other hand, it's like, that is hard work. And I spent 30 years as a lawyer and did a lot of hard work. And since I let that go, I'm totally into doing work that I enjoy. And
Sure.
as you were saying about your coaching practice, if I don't enjoy it at this age, I'm not going to do it. I mean, actually, I did have to get up on my roof and clean our eaves out. So I guess I'm still willing to do some things that must be done that I don't enjoy, but they're very limited.
Well, if you were to record one of your own books, I would say start with one of your memoirs. Then you're dealing with something that is more intimate to you. You don't have to deal with characters in quite the same way, and it's your story. So it might come more easily.
That's probably good advice. I had one small experience on another podcast. The host asked me to do a recording of an excerpt from one of my books. And it was a particular book, and the conversation was going to be about this book. And it was a very political novel called Anarchist Republican Assassin. And it's sort of it's a novel, and it's kind of a fantasy of what should have happened to Donald Trump. But anyway, uh, and he's this very left-wing podcaster, and so he really liked this book, and he wanted me to do this recording, and he was going to use it as kind of an extra to our conversation. And he said he wanted 10 minutes. So I tried, like,
Wow.
I could not do 10 minutes. I mean, I tried, and it was terrible. So I did 5 minutes, and even just doing 5 minutes where I was satisfied with the product it was tough. I mean,
Yeah.
I've done acting. I was a trial lawyer. I can stand up and spontaneously uh, spin off an argument or an opening statement that I've got pretty well memorized, but to just read something and do it really well is like, no, that's not one of my talents.
Well, I was very resistant to doing this for a long time. I kept saying, you know what, let somebody else narrate it when the time comes. And I was kind of talked into it because, like you, I've taught and I do stuff like this, and I've had a radio show. I can talk and talk and talk and talk, but to sit and read something in a way that is compelling and is at the right pace and all of that, I felt very daunted. But it turns out I guess I can do it because I did. So,
Wow. Yeah, that's yeah, it's a to do things like reading and acting and writing, and these are all completely different things. They're not it's it's funny oh, what's his name? Shoot, he now I can't remember the name of the comedian. Mitch Hedberg said once of his career that people were like, "Great, you're a comedian. Can you write?"
make me laugh.
It's like write something that makes me laugh. And it's like yeah, it's a completely different thing. I mean, I do leadership training on the side, and writing this book about leadership is a completely different thing. It's a completely different muscle, and yeah, it's hard to work out.
Well,
Well, it's like in,
like
go ahead.
you'll see an actor, a brilliant actor, and then they'll be interviewed. It's like when they don't have the lines written for it, it can be shocking about, oh
Yeah,
my God, you're so inarticulate. And
yeah.
so I thought, no, these are really different talents.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, muscle is a good word for it. It really requires different muscles.
Yeah.
Well, it's like real dialogue, like we're having right now, conversation, and written dialogue. I mean, if we were to take this and turn it into dialogue in a book, it'd be rambling, and because listening to it is fun, one thing, but reading it as a transcript would be something else altogether.
Yeah.
I also write screenplays and teach screenwriting, and I talk about dialogue as being um, not true life, but true to life. It has to sound like it's real, but it can't be real because it was if we transcribed a conversation with all the ums and ahs and run-on sentences and sentences that leap from one to the other, we'd never be able to follow it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, something that's really interesting is to see a transcript of your actual conversation. Because as a lawyer, we
Of
do
course.
depositions, and the court reporter actually records those ums and ahs and everything. She takes it down. And then you think, oh yeah, man, I sounded really great in that deposition, and I was right on. And then you read the transcript, is oh my God, I sound like a bumbling idiot because of the ums and ahs,
Right.
and you
Mm-hmm.
don't realize you're going off on a tangent, and so that's a very interesting exercise for anybody who's into public speaking to experience. But you're right. Within the context of the conversation, it works. To see there, I just that the court
Yeah.
reporter would have taken that down. Whereas here, it would, it's okay. That's just like a little spacer.
And of course, you interrupted yourself to say that, which again, on the page wouldn't work as well.
No, a little too self-conscious.
Well, in radio, and I have the ability to do it. I just don't plug it in. You normally hear yourself in your headphones, and and I used to be much worse with my ums and ahs. But then I started listening to myself and realizing that I'm doing it, and because when you hear it, it's just so disturbing. it's disturbing just to hear your own voice, but especially when it's in real time.
Well, I was going to say that was maybe the hardest part of doing the audiobook was listening to my own voice as I'm recording, um, uh, because then you get hypercritical.
Yeah.
And it's how you listen but don't judge as you go, which I guess it's the same thing in writing, how you write and don't judge as you go. So that was an exercise too, and just listening for mistakes so I could stop and do it again, but not judging my voice and not judging my narration and not judging my how I'm expressing the characters and all of that. That was hard.
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but when I hear my recorded voice, I it surprises me. It's like, no, I don't sound like that in my own head. That's a
No.
different person. I mean, did you experience that when you were doing the
Well,
narration?
I have a background as a journalist. So back in the day, I would tape record with real tape, not digitally, tape record my interviews. So I got used to not fast forwarding over my own voice, which I couldn't stand. And so over the years, I've gotten used to it. So that wasn't so much. I now know I don't sound like the way I think I sound, and I just deal with it. But certainly in the early days of doing interviews and then transcribing or playing them back to take notes from them, that was hard. That was hard too. Like, ooh, I don't sound like that. I don't want to sound like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I find
Okay,
I
so
sound
I
like
want
my
to.
brother. I found that my voice sounds like
I
my
do
brother's
too.
voice. So yeah, so that's a
Yeah,
little weird.
same with me. Yeah, that is weird. Okay, but so now I want to reveal myself. This is evidence that I'm an old fart. Something that really has gotten to bug me lately is the use of like.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so I was listening to a program on NPR this last weekend, which is a great program. It's radio. I think it's Radio Science. I think that's the title of it. Anyway, and they have scientists on, and they're interview the scientists, and they have a deep discussion about some interesting topic in science. And so the scientist this last Sunday um, I'm guessing she was in her 30s, and she was, highly intelligent, speaking on this, sort of esoteric topic, and every clause she used like she would have to say like every time she would like
Oh no.
every clause, and it was so distracting. And this is a generational thing, because I have two millennial sons, and one of them says like a lot, the other one not so much. But I've noticed people for the most part under 40 um, use like excessively, and my wife and I were having this discussion, and we were trying to remember. So, what was the similar
Mm-hmm.
linguistic tick of our generation? We thought maybe
Mm-hmm.
not but
Yeah,
You
no.
know.
might
No.
be. But anyway, what do you guys think of that?
I noticed that too, and I guess I don't think it bothers me as much as it bothers you, but I am aware. But I am aware of it.
Yeah. I was
I
just
taught a
thinking.
college class for a few years. I didn't teach this year, but I had taught about 5 years, and then with a break for COVID. Many of my students was just almost like an addiction. I mean, it was a compulsion that they just couldn't help it.
Well, here's the good
With
news:
one
if it is
student,
generational, it'll pass,
yeah, very
and
much.
and will be replaced by something else annoying.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, with one student, I finally pointed it out privately, not in front of the other class because he was a really intelligent guy and very articulate. And he wanted to go into law. And so I took him aside and I said, this isn't going to work when you're interviewing with a law firm or when you're in court because it's going to distract at least older people. And the senior partners are going to be older people, judges are going to be older people. And he actually improved. I mean, the likes didn't disappear. But when I was a young lawyer, one of the partners in this firm I was in, where I'm in his office and we're talking about this case, we're preparing for a hearing, and I said, and he stops and says, Jeff, if I didn't know, I would tell you and I would ask you. And if you assume I know, you don't need to ask me if I know. It's like, oh, oof. And then the next thing he said is, mistakes are to be avoided. And so, I mean, it was a hilarious little experience, but it was also very memorable. And
Well, all these
so,
ticks,
in the I'm
you say
sorry, go ahead.
all these ticks are unconscious. So pointing it out gives you an opportunity to do something about it, because we don't think as we don't think as we say, or we don't think as when we say like, we just do it.
I'm reminded
And
of.
I was grateful for him to do that, and I got better about not saying, at least in the context of a formal setting
Mhm.
like a court or even conversation with other lawyers.
So it makes me think of Frank Zappa and the invention of the Valley Girl. Like, for sure, Uh, totally.
Well, Zappa was wonderful.
Zappa
What
was
a
wonderful.
genius.
Yes, he was. And most people don't realize that the Valley Girl accent was invented by him. Yeah. So it's really kind of funny to think about those kinds of ticks and how he put it all together like that to create something that became a thing. And uh,
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Like,
for sure.
My wife is still teaching. She's English professor, English literature professor, and she's told me when we were having this discussion the other day that the current one is "you mean," that her students will start sentences with "you mean." You mean like that's the proof I'm supposed to put forward in my next paper? And she said, "Well, it's especially annoying to her because you mean if you're going to say you mean, it ought to come at the end as like a question there. I just said as a question as opposed to starting something that you're saying as opposed to a question of the other person. What did you mean? But
where
Do you
do all these
mean?
things come from?
I wish I knew. Then we could stop it.
Yeah.
yeah, how did they get started?
Yeah. Especially now with like Grammarly and just regular spell check and grammar check on word processors. Constantly, even my phone now tells me that I've done one of these things. It puts up a little bright green line, and like, no, you don't mean that. And I'm like, well, I kind of did at the time, but yeah, that's wrong.
My problem with my phone is it does not acknowledge my Canadian accent, which I still have apparently after 26 years in this country. Whenever I dictate now, it types no, N-O. Whenever I, so
Okay.
they're supposed to learn. They're supposed to learn, right, over time. So I keep
That's
correcting
what I
it,
thought.
and it refuses. It totally refuses.
Okay.
My assumption of how these things get started is that influencers, actors, rock stars,
Mm,
people that we think are cool, and particularly, and why I think they're generational is that people of a certain age um, think, this person is cool. I want to sound like that person. First, we're huge, and I was, preteen. And kids started all of a sudden in Goshen, Indiana, having a British accent. Uh, so uh, I mean, I've never made a study of this, but that seems to make sense. I mean, we all want to be cool. We want to be like
sure.
cats that are hip. So
Especially at that age.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now, of course, with social media and the internet, these things kind of leap into public consciousness and usage much more quickly, I would guess, and stay there for the same reason.
Yeah. Yeah, thinking about it that way, I'm guessing that a lot of the you knows and you means and stuff are probably coming from like TikTok. Uh, the poor grammar and the linguistic tics are probably well. I mean, social media in general. I mean.
And,
Wow, now I'm hearing it.
and texting, where we adopt all kinds of shortcuts.
yeah. Well, Bill, you could stick with that. I mean, you'll lose several years in age because
You know,
that's a Gen Zer. Get rid of the because that's baby boomer. Drop the like because that's millennial. Stick with you mean, and then
You
people
mean,
will think you're
okay.
a Gen Zer.
Oh, goodness. No, I'm perfectly pleased being a Gen Xer. Uh, but yeah,
So what's the
yeah.
yeah? So what's the Gen X? I mean, we've got for baby boomers, we've got like for millennials. I mean for Zers. So what's your Gen X? Because
Well,
you Gen Xers, you're always sort of left out there.
we are kind of left out. We're the redheaded stepchildren of generations. Um,
so
I don't know.
here's
I
the
always
opportunity
heard
to
a lot of
create something.
dudes. I always heard a lot of dude,
Dudes, yeah.
dude,
Yeah.
dude.
Dude,
It's a
yeah.
language unto itself.
Well, so do you remember the character Spicoli
Yes, yes. Fast Times at Ridgemont
in
High.
that's it. Dude. I
Dude.
mean, wasn't he that would that have been a Gen X or would that be millennial? I think that'd be Gen X.
Yeah, the movie at least was Gen
And the
X.
whole the sort of slacker dude, isn't that slacker dude?
Hmm.
Isn't that Gen X?
Yeah, yeah. The whole slacker thing, but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Dude came out a lot, and although I don't personally think I have that tick.
We're listening.
Yeah, now everybody's listening. Dude, cut it out. But yeah, I'm thinking that yeah, it comes from whatever's popular in the social group. I'm going to stop talking now. That's just.
I mean, like, dude.
You mean
Yeah. Yeah, because you think about it, if Spicoli was what got people saying "dude," and social media today is what got what has people saying "you mean," then it's got to be the social whatever the social media of the day is. If the Beatles got the kids in rural Indiana to talk with a British accent, then perhaps that's how it is throughout time. You get
Well, it's popular culture, and again,
pop culture.
with social media, things just disseminate more quickly and more widely.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking it's got to be
Yeah, because it
the
was
pop
always sort of a
culture.
mystery when, back before internet and texting and social media, et cetera, though, how these things would spread. Um,
Yeah.
I grew up in northern small town Indiana. When I was 10 years old, we went out to LA, family trip, cross country road trip to visit our aunt, uncle, and cousins in LA. And so, wow. And they were older, they were teenagers. Oh, wow, cool. Surfer, Beach Boys, and all that. And yeah, so much of the popular culture and the sayings, well, back the term cool was cool. It was cool to say cool.
It was cool to say
That
cool.
rural or small town Indiana and suburban LA, there really wasn't that much difference. And somehow,
Well,
these things
movies and TV.
spread. Yeah.
You watch the same TV that they
Movies and
watched.
TV.
You saw the same movies that they saw. So that there's
True, but here's one. Explain this. My wife and I have compared, for example, silly songs that we sang in grade school out in the playground. So not what the teachers are teaching us in the classroom, and yet we knew some of the same verses and songs. And she grew up in Virginia. And so it's this, there's somehow this, I mean, you'd call it tentacles, grapevine that's moving across the country that grade school kids are somehow tuned into. I mean,
right.
how did we know those same silly songs?
Some
Because they
collective
weren't taught
unconscious
to us
thing.
by our parents.
Some
Yeah,
collective unconscious thing going on, I guess.
yeah.
But
It was
that
very
is true.
Jungian.
Yeah.
No, I think
No. Yeah. Well, when you think about it, our ancestry came from, or a lot of the ancestry of the United States came from a single place. And so you have that source material there. What was it? I guess the song from Big Bang Theory, "Soft Kitty," is originally an English folk song. So that's coming from there, and that's how in part that spread. Um, so yeah. So I'm thinking that the way that it spread is, that we get like the silly songs and stuff, is that it all comes from one source. And we could probably find that if we looked hard enough. I don't know. Maybe that doesn't make any sense. Well,
I'm I'm going with kids just visit, and this kid from this school visits that school, and that a kid from that school visits the next. So it's just a network that spreads. But maybe it is the collective consciousness. I don't know.
well, it's like that old Breck TV commercial where you tell two friends who tell two friends who tell two friends. So
yeah,
Hmm.
but it still has to begin somewhere.
right.
Our host disappeared.
Right. Well, I mean, look at story plots. How many are there? Really, there are many. There are infinite variations of all these plots, but in the end, you've got to. It seems like there's a finite number that we then work from. So where do those come from? Do they also live somewhere deep within our, again, collective unconscious? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
Of
we'll
course,
leave that to the unions. But anyway, my internet connection seems to be getting worse. So, and we've been at this for about an hour. So I'm gonna ask you, gentlemen, if you have any final words for the nice people.
Well,
Read our books.
since we're into si- right, read our books. But since we're into the new year, I would just say, you know, best wishes for 2024. Be good to each other, be good to other people, and spread love, kindness, and joy.
Okay.
And I can't really top that.
So go out and and buy the audio. Go buy Mark David's audiobook and buy Jeff's book, and yeah, I'll put the links in the description so people can find your stuff real easily. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been a presentation of Bald Spots Productions. I'd like to thank our producer, my beloved mother, Eileen Hatch. I, of course, am your humble host. I'd also like to thank my special guest, Jeff Rasley, who is a philanthropist, author of A Hitchhiker's Big Adventure, and president of 2 charitable foundations. And Mark David Gerson, who is author of the Legend of Kintara series and a bunch of books to help writers. He's also a writing coach. Support the show if you feel so led over on patreon.com. We're known as Bald Spots Pro. Don't you dare miss YWL Online. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and wherever fine podcasts are offered. Be sure to tune in next time when my special guests will be Glenda Benavides, a Grammy-considered artist who has planted over 250 trees around the world. And Anthony Rosano. He's a severe burn survivor who is now an NFL agent and author of Against All Odds, a story of faith, courage, and never giving up. Be sure to like, comment, and share. Subscribe, follow, whatever it is you've got to do to kick that algorithm into gear and help us reach more people. If you or someone you know needs support now, call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org. That is the suicide and crisis lifeline here in the United States.